Hi, I'm Brian Kellerman, co-founder and Chief Food Safety Officer at Kellerman Consulting, and you are watching our video series on corrective and preventive actions. And in this video, we are going to discuss how to handle employee actions that lead to non-conformances or errors, especially those where employee behavior involves impunity or where disciplinary actions may be required. Most mishaps, errors, loss of control events, and non-conformances do not lead to employee disciplinary actions. And regulators and auditors are not looking for employees being reprimanded or fired as a result of these deviations or as part of corrections or corrective actions. Non-conforming events, including those caused by employee errors, are an expected part of an operation, and where they occur, retraining, proficiency evaluation, or redirecting employees to more appropriate tasks are the most likely responses. However, where employees do display problematic behavior within the organization, the CAPA program and several other programs within operations will need to be used to make sure the system maintains integrity as leadership and management deal with the employees and any potential fallout in addressing the problematic behavior. So, let's dive into the underlying topics and sort out how to handle these situations. We defined impunity in our first video series as a feeling that people confuse with freedom. It is not freedom, but rather when employees feel that rules do not apply to them. Since all policies and procedures must be adhered to as part of conformance of our food safety system, impunity technically is always a non-conformance wherever it is observed. With that said, not all observations of employees ignoring or otherwise refusing to follow policies and procedures call for a non-conformance report, and a verbal correction is often sufficient to address the behavior in minor instances. An example of this would be an employee that wears a hairnet under a ball cap but refuses to wear one above the ball cap as well. This is not an emergency, but we can't let it slide because others may mimic the behavior, and it goes against the established policies of the facility. Similarly, an employee who takes a quick cell phone call and ducks into a hallway but doesn't change gloves and wash hands upon returning may be creating an unsanitary situation, and this must be addressed, but may not raise to the level of a disciplinary action in a low-risk environment. In both of these examples, I recommend that a written record is made, but this can be part of a GMP inspection log, HR issue, or maybe a note taken in a QA or leadership notebook. The important part is that the event and correction are documented. So how do we decide when an employee's behavior rises to a level where a non-conformance report is warranted and where a corrective action, up to and including disciplinary warning or action, is required? First, anytime an employee exhibits behavior that suggests an attitude of impunity around a key metric, immediate attention should be given to the situation. Management or leadership should promptly remove the employee from the situation and privately address the issue. There should be no exceptions here. If it is a willful act of disobedience or unsafe action, such as reaching into dangerous equipment without following proper lockout-tagout procedures, disabling safety mechanisms, or tampering with critical equipment, strict disciplinary action should be taken in accordance with your company's policies. Similarly, where fraud or intentional acts of food safety violations are observed, a zero-tolerance policy is an appropriate response. Since we are required to have protections against internal and external fraud threats as part of our food fraud prevention program, any CAPA investigation where fraud is determined to be a potential root cause should immediately trigger a fraud investigation, which would supersede the CAPA investigation. The results of the fraud investigation must be fully documented, and where fraud is the determined root cause, then the CAPA investigation is resolved when the fraud is addressed. Where fraud is not identified, it can be noted as part of the CAPA report, and the corrective action or preventive action determined to resolve the situation is the final step. In all of these types of significant issues, a written non-conformance report by QA or leadership, along with a corrective action report, is needed. A root cause analysis of how the employee behaved and the scope of the damage they caused, if any, must be included with the paperwork. If incorrect product or processes are discovered, the affected food must be verified as safe according to specifications or reworked or discarded. For situations where an employee is willfully resistant to rules that are not a critical safety or fraud issue, management retains the right to use documentation following human resources policies in place of a quality assurance written non-conformance and corrective action report. Updating an employee's employment file and issuing a warning certainly counts as a correction, and if no risk to product is observed, the requirements for corrective action and preventive action may not be applicable. An example here would be an employee who continually leaves food in a locker, which can attract pests into a facility. In an example like keeping food in a locker, this is a food safety concern because of the possibility of pest infestation. However, if only one employee is putting food in a locker, and where they do so because they don't care what the rule is and think it doesn't apply to them, triggering a site-wide corrective action such as retraining or increasingly restricting food may cause team member morale issues. In that case, it's probably more effective to address it on an individual level. When we have non-conformances, mishaps, or errors in which impunity or defiant employee behavior is not a root cause, disciplinary action is rare and would be unexpected from the standpoint of a regulator, auditor, or customer. In fact, if it is not a dangerous or life-threatening display of insubordination, a fraudulent act, or an error with significant cost ramifications, a corrective action or preventive action of termination might actually be seen as inappropriate where less drastic measures still exist. And lastly, any disciplinary finding or termination involving a food safety issue must have follow-up assessments after the action to determine if reprimanding or removing the perceived problem employee resulted in a changed work environment. If an employee has been engaged in problematic behavior and is identified as the root cause of a safety or personnel issue, their removal should have observable improvements. If not, it suggests that the employee may not have been the true problem or that a larger cultural issue requires action. Thank you for watching. For more food safety training videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel.